councillors who wish to declare? No, we do not. We'll move on to the approval of minutes. Councillor Henry, all those in favour? There we go. And delegations, always a pleasant evening. The Youth Council update presentation. Dawn, the floor is yours.
Oh, go ahead. Good evening, Mayor, Councillors, and Senior Management. Tonight we are here to give you a brief presentation regarding the activities that the City of Waterloo. So we'll get them to come up and join me. So we have Melanie King. She is part-time staff. She works with me, and she's a facilitator for Youth Council. Then I'm going to get them to wave at you when I say their name. We have Carmen, Lean, Caitlin, and Alex. And together we are going to do the presentation. Some are going to just be supporters, and others are going to help with the presentation. So first of all, I do want to share, I think most of you know what council is. Community. We do like to build leadership skills, facilitate teamwork, encourage communication skills, build self-esteem, and increase time management skills. That's a huge one for all of us, I think. And Youth Council is led by Melanie, our part-time facilitator. The age prerequisite, we did increase it this year to include university and college students. This year we had about 15 to 20 that participated weekly in Youth Council. Their ages were 14 to 19. 99% this year were high school students, and we'll see where it goes. Maybe next year we may get some university and college students. The result was contributing over 800 volunteer hours as a whole as a committee. Then we had a month of leadership learning sessions. Melanie's very creative, and she had L for leadership, listen, inspire, ignite the fire. Were just a few of the different leadership sessions. We established volunteers for subcommittees, or 4 different committees. They're listed there. We had extra volunteering efforts that we'll talk about. We had event planning for our mini events that we had in December, and then January was a leadership day. We had spring events, and then we had a thank you for the youth. So now we're just going to talk about a couple of those volunteer opportunities. One of them was Toasty Toes. It was part of a sock drive campaign, and the youth were able to collect 9 committee, and they were able to create stress kits that would then be given to members of the public, mainly high school students and university students. We saw a lot were taken for, and it just had a couple things in the contents that youth could use to help de-stress, especially during that kind of exam time that they were approaching. As you can see, a couple things in there: bubble wrap, coloring sheets, stretchy fidget toys, box of Smarties, everyone needs chocolate, inspirational quote, and then an information pamphlet about youth in the community were encouraged to take a photo and then write a short essay about it. They were then submitted to the committee that then went through and evaluated them on different criteria. In all, they received 10 submissions, and they were ranked for first, second, and third, and they were put on display at the Waterloo Rec Complex.
Okay, so our Sports and Recreation Committee held a free event at Rim Park to encourage youth to be active and have fun with friends. It was an event open to all those ages 10 to 18, and we had 15 to 18 youth participate in activities like dodgeball, soccer, and handball.
So then at the end of the fall term, we had a holiday social and evaluation event. So the youth got to watch a movie at the rec complex, and we did some debriefing on their events. And we also had some snacks. Some of the things that we learned from the evaluations that evening were talking about better ways to advertise with the youth and developing better organization for their meeting structure. We held a leadership day at the rec complex, and 12 of the youth on Youth Council were able to participate, and we did some fun things, and we had a lot of team building. And the focus of the day was learning practical skills to assist them in their meetings for February to May. And here are a few pictures of us just having fun and playing some games.
We had a couple different special guests that came. One of them was a lady named Nicole. She works as a student at the University of Waterloo as a planning student, and she came and talked about engaging in interactive spaces, specifically uptown, and how to get the youth more engaged in technology in the uptown. We had a gentleman named Brian come in from Nutrition for Learning, talking about that organization, giving the youth some ideas for volunteering in their community and just getting the ball rolling early on. And then we had a lady named Tammy come in from Family and Children's Services to share more about her organization. It was for an event that we'll talk more about in a minute.
Volunteer opportunity Valentine's Day for Vet campaigns was a fun night of appreciation for those who have fought for our freedom, designing appreciation cards for veterans. Together, Youth Council made over 20 cards of appreciation.
The youth also participated in 2 different focus groups over the year. One of them was the City of Waterloo's neighborhood strategies. So representatives from the city came in and gathered feedback from the youth about their neighborhoods and what they enjoyed. And then we also had the Region of Waterloo Public Health come in and do a focus group on fitness, mental health, and nutrition. So it was just an opportunity for the youth to provide their own ideas and thoughts. One of the events that we did in the spring, as we talked about earlier with Family and Children's Services, the youth had the opportunity to sell Rio Thompson mint smoothie chocolates. If you didn't get one, I'm sorry. But they were able to raise $400 with those chocolates, and they used the money to then go to Walmart and buy over $400 worth of materials for Family and Children's Services. So a wide variety of items was then collected and able to be donated.
So another one of our events in the second term was hosted by the Environment Committee. So it's called EnviroFun, and it was an opportunity for families to be in nature and to learn more about the environment in a fun and interactive way. So we had a circuit set up with different activities like pot painting, Trash or Not, which was a sorting game, Animals in the Wilderness, which is an eco game, and we had a trivia session, since at the end of each station, one of the youth council members would share a fact about the environment. And then one of our other events during the second term was put on by the Sports and Rec Committee, and it was the Children's Fun Day event. So the purpose was to have an opportunity for kids to come out and be kids and play. So the idea was to help kids be very positive, and keeping kids active is a great idea, but we did notice in this event that one area that the Youth Council does need to grow in is in recruitment and getting attendance for events. So attendance was low, but it was a great learning experience for the next events to come.
We wrapped up the year with a year-end thank you that happened in May. It was a fun way to bring the group together and kind of provide them with a little challenging opportunity, but a fun social time together. We went to Adventure Room, and the group was split into 2 teams to try and escape Adventure Room. If you haven't been, it was a really fun opportunity. And then we debriefed all the Youth Council events that happened since our winter activities. At the year-end thank you, we talked about some of the skills that youth had learned: leadership, organization, public speaking, taking initiative, details of event planning, how to take meeting notes, and interacting with the public were just a couple of the skills that youth were able to learn.
So where we want to go in 2017-2018 is we really want to look at partnering with different established events that are already happening, where we can come in and do some events and help them. And then we wouldn't have to try to get people to come to our events, which is kind of challenging for us. Continue to offer fun leadership and learning for the Youth Council. Continue to allow them to be a part of something bigger in and within the community. And then we do want to always give back to the community. And then a goal is for us to have an opportunity to advise on different issues and youth programming in and around Waterloo. So tonight,
So as Dawn said, this is my second year on Youth Council, And during my first year, I was still starting out and getting to learn the ropes, but this year I decided to take a bigger leadership role, and I chaired 2 of the committees. And I found that my experience in Youth Council has been great so far. I've had the chance to meet a bunch of cool, like-minded teens that also want to give back to their community. But through this experience, I've also learned a lot in time management, event planning, and teamwork, which I've already begun to see how they're helping me in school and my activities outside school, and I know that they'll only continue to help me as I further my education. Another really important skill that I've learned is leadership through success. So I'd really like to thank Youth Council and the city for giving me this opportunity to develop my leadership skills and all the other skills that I've learned through Youth Council.
So on behalf of all of us standing here and those that couldn't be here tonight, we do want to thank you around the table for allowing us to continue to offer this for youth in Waterloo. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have at least a couple of councillors who have something to say. We'll start with Councillor Whaley.
My comment is to Carmen. In your remarkable 2 years in your Waterloo Youth Council, I'm telling you right now that I'm just merely keeping this seat warm for you, and I expect you to be taking over my seat at the Waterloo regular council meeting sometime very soon.
I'll definitely take you up on that.
Perfect.
Councillor Leith.
Through you, Chair Burke, thank you, and thanks for coming. It was great. It's always great to get an update. I just have 3 really tough questions. So where do you typically meet?
So we do meet at the Waterloo Rec Complex.
All of your events or your meetings?
Well, that's where weekly meetings are met, and then events are in and around. We did a lot in our facilities this year, so we were at RIM, we were at the Rec Complex, we were at Bechtel Park, so we try to stay in and around Waterloo.
Okay, so, and how do you advertise for youth? Like, how do youth communicate to come out?
A lot of times, it's those that are already on Youth Council that are sharing it with their friends to come. We do send things out to the high schools, to the guidance counselors, with the hopes that they will put those up. And we do advertise in the P&A guide, and also communications helps us on Facebook and things like that.
And my third question, is there a cost? So if you had a bunch of kids coming out to whatever event, does it cost them money to come?
There is sometimes a cost. It depends on the event. Sometimes we just do it by donation if you want to donate. This year our numbers were a little lower at the event, so we didn't put that in the presentation because the amount that was brought in was quite small this year.
Okay, it's interesting because there are a ton of youth in my neighborhood that need to be to come to these events. So anyway, maybe I can connect you.
We also have it up on the website, but maybe what we will do is in the future pass it along to the councillors, and then you could put it out in the neighborhoods, or we can connect and we can find a way to advertise with them.
I can make some connections for you.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Jaworski.
Well, through the chair, thank you all very much. I think this will look great on your resume going forward as you continue to build it and look for communicating with youth, right? You know, sometimes on Twitter, on Facebook, and things like that. And although we have the Great Waterloo Chronicle, we wish everybody of 133,000 would be reading it. That's not necessarily the case, particularly with your youth group, the age group demographic. What are some pieces of advice you could give both as counselors, as the city, in terms of communicating with youth? Where are people getting their information? It sounds like a lot of word of mouth.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of that. Obviously, like social media, we're on it all the time. So like Instagram and Twitter are always good ways to reach us. Usually what I find is really effective is going through the schools, because they're constantly bombarding us with a bunch of events that are coming up. And usually if the schools start to hype it up, everybody hears it in the mornings. So even just connecting with some students at school who can get it done, like I've made announcements at my school before, and usually that ends up being really effective for getting people informed and out to events.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all.
And thank you for the presentation. It is nice to, it's nice to see people come here and not only talk about the challenges they've faced, but the opportunities that they see in the future. And I think I speak for all the councillors when I say if there's things that we can do to help to get the word out, we do have a fair number of connections, and I know we're more than happy to do that, because I think every one of us would like all of you to replace all of us. I think that would be cool. Presentations here, do we? Looking for movers and seconders? For a condominium conversion application, we'll go with that one.
Questions on that?
You do? Okay.
So, who am I directing my questions to?
Should be to Daniel or Danielle.
So I was interested in reading the report, and I do have a couple of questions with respect to this. First of all, the reasons for conversion were not provided, and so I am curious, and I know the neighborhood is curious to why someone would convert a rental unit to a condominium. Is that none of our business? And can't we ask that question because it was not provided?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Whaley. The applicants don't always convey to us the exact reasons that they're looking to convert these units. Often it is just an income stream where they see value in the property and they want to shift the tenure from rental to ownership. So it could just be as simple as that. In this case, I don't recall seeing any specific reasons.
So that's merely a supposition at this stage then?
Yes, that's correct.
With respect to the application itself, it's being recommended because the units are considered not affordable. And I guess we just wanted to give it a quick rubber stamp, but there was a couple other criteria, and one was of the health and safety issues. And again, staff have not been provided with a health and safety report from anyone. So isn't it our job, our responsibility to determine whether there are health and safety issues in light of the fact that nobody's given us the information? We say, well, didn't get any information, so I guess it's okay.
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Whaley. Information is dealing with a technical safety audit for the property to ensure that it is safe and up to current standards prior to the conversion taking effect.
That's an answer. With respect to the notion that the building complies with the current urban design guide manual, and I asked council to take a look at the picture on page 25 of the report. Nice roof. But when I did do a drive-by on the weekend, I noticed that it was stucco cladding, there were no balconies, no green space, no amenity space, one parking space per 5 bedrooms, no guest parking, and you know, I'd have to say basically one of the uglier student housing warehouses that we'd ever approved. And how can that possibly comply with the current, and the word, the emphasis on current urban design manual, because I know since 2007 it's been updated, certainly this building wouldn't qualify under current urban design guidelines, would it?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Whaley, you're correct, it would not meet our current urban design standards. The test that we generally look at is whether it met the standards at the time of when it was approved and whether it's generally consistent with our overall site planning requirements in the city. If we see any deficiencies, the core deficiencies that exist, we would ask those to be remedied through application.
So I'm confused by this. I can appreciate that the building would seem fairly new by being built in 2007, but the intent is to comply with current urban design manual guidelines. You said it doesn't. There's no intention for us to as a condition of this approval, demand a higher level of either amenities or all the other reasons why we have all the other points for the design.
Honestly, would have the scope to request modifications to the building itself beyond those identified in the technical safety audit that would be required as a condition of approval. If there were, of course, situations of disrepair, we could actually apply conditions, I believe, to remedy some of those conditions in that they would be a safety issue or just from a broad compliance of the original approval. With respect to things like landscaping and council's authority.
These were difficult questions, Mr. Cotter. Thank you for being so forthright, and I'll have further comments when we get to that stage. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I guess I'm looking for a mover at this point. Moved by Mayor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Freeman. Any more discussion?
So we lived through an era of rapid change for the city, and developers quickly sprung forward with that need by building a lot of buildings. Some of them weren't anything that I think we can be proud of today, and I think this is an example of that. We have a chance here to do a bit of a redo, to because of this, ask for the developer who's making this request for a change in its status to put forth some amenities. Imagine 5 bedrooms, not even one parking space for all 5 bedrooms, no amenity space, no balconies, no green space. We have an opportunity to undo some of that by with this request, taking into account some of the current design guidelines that we have today and put some of that test on what we have and perhaps make kind of an eyesore into something that we can be a little bit happier with as a community.
On my daily travels. There was a lot that previous council had done in terms of these areas that certainly is less than ideal, but I struggle to understand how Councillor Whaley's direction broadly could be implemented. There seems to be a suggestion there should be both more parking and more green space. Both cannot be true. And fair for a city to consider on similar matters. This is not the first one of these properties built in this era on this street that has asked for this thing. And we have made a consistent decision before, and making an inconsistent decision now would seem to me to be problematic, notwithstanding our policy framework. All of that said, I think there is an opportunity here to do a little bit more, and I'd look for Mr. Cotter's guidance on how in particular that area near the entrance, which appears to be some sense of furniture zone and gathering space. I'm not sure what it was originally site planned intended to do, but right by that front door, it is the most desolate looking, seating, waiting area that I shouldn't say that I have ever seen, because I don't know that to be true. This is pretty poor in that location, and maybe there's something that we can ask for folks to take a look at in terms of landscaping and other amenity treatment at the entrance, because it is far less than grand. I don't want to overly direct you, recognizing we may have some limits, but if there is an area of deficiency where we may be able to pick up some steam, it may be there, especially given the GRT stop in the area. It is an area where people ought to be able to find some gathering opportunities. So that's something I'd hope that you'd explore. The one thing I did pick up in this report that I very much appreciate, but also that concerned me, is it does appear that one unit within this building may not have been used for the amenity area that it was supposed to be at the beginning. There does seem to be some notes in the report on one of those ground floor units to make sure that it is indeed being used as amenity space. And so I think that may help as well through this process, that we can get that converted properly back to what it was originally intended to do. So that's my note on what I'm thankful that you found and that we may be able to correct, but maybe there's something more we can do in the entrance area in terms of site treatment and landscape.
And it passes. Item B, the traffic and parking bylaw amendments. Are there any? You move the motion? Councillor Beath moves the motion, seconded by Councillor Freeman. Any questions? Seeing none, call for it. All those in favor? Opposed? None? Carried. It is time to open up the first episode of the Trevor Hawkins Show. It isn't quite, did I miss one? Oh, there's a C, I forgot a C, sorry about that. Sorry, guys. Item C, comments on proposed modifications to Ontario Regulation 311/06, Transitional Matters Growth Plans. Mover? Yep. Moved by Councillor Veith, by Councillor Henry, and back to Councillor Veith.
This really disturbs me when I read this. We have gone so far. We spent a lot of there's a lot of momentum in getting our stationaries planned, and I think this is really important that we really lobby the government and make sure we don't. I would hate to see this languish for another 4 or 5 years.
Any more comments? Councillor Henry?
I think I was going to put Councillor Veith's question to Scott Nevin in place of Adam. There seems to be some allusion in the report to conversations with the province on these matters. Is there any hope? Maybe I'll just leave it there. Is there any hope, Scott?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Henry, I would say there's some hope. I'm not overly optimistic. To date, we've had some conversations with provincial staff. The mayor has sent a letter to the province formally. We hope to meet with at least one area MPP in the very short term, and we'll continue to talk with both regional staff and provincial staff, and also encourage regional staff to hopefully send some correspondence to the province. So we're trying to work all the levers that we see. Whether we'll be successful or not, I'm not certain.
Yeah, and I'd say the argument that we have is a strong one. In effect, part of the reason for the province's update to its documents is to try to get more of what it's looking for in municipalities around intensification and particularly around stations. And yet in doing so in this particular way, it may actually delay and perhaps prevent some aspect of that here. That clearly can't be what they intend to do. And while I don't hold out, a wellspring of optimism, I do think there's a glimmer there, and I'm glad there are so many conversations happening. That we're losing effectively the power to do our own municipal comprehensive reviews going forward, and that they're left to the region is a battle we already lost. One can hope that we get one last kick at the can to be able to do what they were looking for, and that they can feel confident that, subject to other compliance with every other matter of growth plan policy, the region is a good protector of this interest in this case.
Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Chair Burke. I just wondered on this matter, it seems to me that this isn't going to be just a City of Waterloo issue with regard to transit areas. And so I just wondered whether it makes sense to try to seize a meeting during the AMO conference with the minister on this matter and take that conversation with our colleagues with the region and Kitchener and Cambridge, because this region has been leaders in terms of policy planning around growth and intensified growth, and this is a key component of it. And so it would seem to me that some of the other levers that are available to us could happen at AMO. So that's just a suggestion. And, well, yeah, I appreciate that. We've sent the letter, but I still think that the wheels of change don't always grind that fast at in Ottawa or in Toronto, especially when they're on a summer break now. So
Are there any other comments? Seeing none? All those in favor? To consider zoning bylaw amendment application Z 1707-1106804 Ontario Limited, 80 King Street South and 87 Regina Street South. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public are seeing this application for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position on this application, and a staff report will be considered. Anyone who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located on the desk at the rear of the council chambers. If there's more than one registry, please make sure you are signing the appropriate one. The planner will now provide a brief overview of the application.
Thank you, Chair Burke, Mayor Jaworski, members of council. Application Z 1707 concerns two properties, and if Councillor Henry leaned back and looked out the window, he could see these two properties directly across the street. The applicant is a numbered company represented by the Torgan Group, and Dan Curry of MHBC Planning will be presenting on their behalf this evening. As I alluded to, the property is actually directly across the street, this being City Hall, Regina Street. It's two different properties split by Hughes Lane, which runs from Willis Way south to William Street. This property at 80 King Street South has a number of commercial businesses that front onto King Street and commercial offices on the second floor. And then in behind at 87 Regina Street South is a surface parking lot which serves that building. The parcels are both within the Uptown Commercial Core designation of our official plan, and they are in the high density area of the primary node of Uptown Waterloo, which would allow 750 bedrooms per hectare if you were developing streets starting at William Street and heading north towards Yonge Street. The property in behind at Regina Street, however, is permitted a height in our official plan of up to 81 meters, or roughly 25 stories. Within the Uptown Commercial Core designation, there's a broad range of permitted uses. It's actually essentially the broadest range of permitted uses of any designation in our official plan. However, this property is also subject to the special policy area, our flood plain. Roads required on both Willis Way and Hughes Lane. In terms of the zoning bylaw, the lands are zoned Commercial 825. The lands on King Street, of course, are subject to a lesser height, even though it has the 25-story designation. That zone, again, is one of the broadest range of permitted uses in our bylaw, a number of commercial uses as reflected in Uptown, as well as residential uses above the meter minimum. And finally, there's a 1991 site-specific bylaw, a rare bylaw that we would find in Waterloo, which exempts both of these parcels from any parking requirements. In terms of the applicant's submission, they are seeking to make adjustments to the Commercial 8 zone as they relate to both of the parcels. One of the main requests is to transfer the residential density from 80 King Street South, where there is the height limit, to 87 Regina Street South. And in terms of a bedrooms per hectare count and the land areas associated with the two parcels, it would equate to approximately 123 bedroom transfer. The applicant is also seeking height increases for both parcels, 14 to 16 meters for the King Street parcel, consistent with the official plan limit, and for the Regina Street parcel from 75 permitted today to 81 as noted in the official plan. The applicant is seeking to measure density in bed per hectare, which is the measurement in our official plan as opposed to units per hectare, which would be the measurement in the zoning bylaw. And they are seeking setback reliefs for both parcels. The building at 80 King Street South is effectively built out to the lot lines today. So they are seeking relief from the front, which would be Willis Way, the rear, which effectively abuts another building, the public lane, the Hughes Lane setback, which would be 2. Regina Street parcel, they are seeking again a reduction in the front, primarily as it relates to the Willis Way widening requirement, the public lane setback of 2.5 meters, and the building will have a rear yard setback that meets the bylaw that would separate it from the regional building directly across the street. And finally, the applicant proposes, and it'll become clearer why, bridge connections from the 80 King Street building to the Regina Street building, from the 80 King Street building to the 87 Regina Street building, and from the 87 Regina Street building to the regional building at 99 Regina Street. So this and how they relate. The parcel on the left, the building on the left, is an existing 2-story building, and the applicant is proposing to add 2 stories of office uses to that structure. And the building on Regina Street, if I can get my cursor, would have its main entrance off of Regina Street into a parking structure, and it would have above-grade parking on floors 2 through 5, and then residential and amenity space above that up to 25 stories. It will have pedestrian entrances from Regina Street and from Willis Way, and the King Street building has a number of entrances that currently exist and would be utilized. Slightly ghosted in, we can see that the bridge connection from the King Street building to the Regina Street building, and then the bridge connection from the Regina Street building to the regional building at 99 Regina. And those bridge connections, and Mr. Curry will go into further detail as to the nature and reasons for them, but they relate to the special policy area floodplain policies and the need, in general terms, I'll leave it in general terms and let Mr. Curry delve into it further, to provide safe access for residents of the residential building in the event of a flood. Some elevations supplied by the applicant, and I'll walk council through all 4 facades of the proposed building. The first on the left is what would face Willis Way, so the King Street building on the right-hand side with the 2 new floors above it, the bridge connection leading to the 5th level, I believe, of this proposed building on Regina Street. And then you can see the parking structure would be above the main floor leading up to here, and then they would have an amenity space, a floor devoted entirely to amenity space before the residential units carry forward to floor 25. The Regina Street facade, so facing effectively City Hall, again the regional building on the left of this image with a bridge connection from the proposed building, the city's parking structure, Willis Way in between, and the facade of the main floor, which would have a mixture of lobbies, amenity areas, and commercial uses. Parking above until you hit that amenity space, and residential units above that amenity space. The south facade, so if we're driving up King Street, this would be the view. I suppose it would be partially blocked by the regional building, of course. The King Street building on the left-hand side and the tower. And then finally the King Street facade with the proposed Regina Street building ghosted in the background behind the proposed studies and reports. There's a number of them. It's although permissive in terms of its existing zoning and official plan framework, there are a number of technical studies that must be submitted to satisfy our policy framework. Planning report, an urban design brief, wind assessment, noise study to assess the noise impacts on the future residential units, transportation impact brief to assess the transportation impacts primarily as they relate to Willis Way and Regina Street, and to a lesser extent Hughes Lane. Functional servicing and stormwater management report, always a challenge to engineer projects in our uptown. The safe access, which I alluded to, the reasons for those bridges, and Mr. Curry will speak further about that. Source water protection, we in Waterloo region have a source water protection plan now. This property being in proximity to the William Street wells. The region requested a source water protection contamination study. And finally, the concept plan and elevations that I presented to council. So staff from this point forward will continue our review of those reports, the plans, the requested changes to the zoning bylaw. We will, in our staff report, outline for council how the project would compare with the second draft of the zoning bylaw, or if there's a third draft before I finish my report, I would compare it with the third draft. And finally, any public and agency comments. And particularly this project given the need to access the regional building. Obviously, the region's comments will be fairly important, and with the flood policies, the GRCA's comments will be fairly important for this project. Thank you, Chair Burke.
We are now looking for councillors who have questions of staff. Please remember, this is an informal public meeting and only questions of clarification may be asked. Council members should not express opinions at this point. Councillor Whaley.
Well, Mr. Hawkins, you called it the primary node. I don't think you've ever made a bigger understatement. On King Street, opposite City Hall, overlooking our beloved town square. I think it's the primary of our primary nodes, if there ever was one. I'm interested in your, I'm looking forward to the presentation from the developer, for sure. But I was interested about the parking, the 2 to 5 story above ground parking. Is it perceived to be for private use of the building, or is there a public use component to the parking?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Whaley, the applicant's proposing 190 parking spaces to support the residential use. There is the possibility that they will make some of those spaces available to support their commercial building on King Street, but not for the general public.
With respect to the bridges, what a cool idea. But the bridge to the 99 Regina here at the Public Health Building, the Social Services Building, that is merely a escape hatch for potential flooding? It's not meant to be a regular thoroughfare?
Chair Burke, at the risk of stealing some of Mr. Curry's thunder, it would be regulated. There would be a locking mechanism that would effectively open it only in the event that an emergency triggered the release of that lock. So it would not allow residents of that building day-to-day access to the regional building.
We'll leave the thunder and the lightning to Mr. Curry.
Mayor Jaworski.
Is there anything that's below grade? I didn't hear anything about below grade.
There is no parking proposed below grade.
Okay. And I saw the one of the changes was 75 meters to 81 meters, but I think I saw in the diagram it still says 25 stories. That's the intention?
Through you, Chair Burke, that's correct. 25 stories, 81 meters.
And then when we originally zoned it, or would have zoned it 14 meters, the front, the King Street facing one, yet the request is for 16 meters. What would have been the intention of 14 meters? That would have been probably 4 stories, and 16 meters is probably still 4 stories?
Well, it's a curious question, actually, because the parent bylaw actually does allow 16 meters for this stretch of King Street. It's only the site-specific bylaw that drops it down to 14 from 16, and then the official plan again refers back to 16. So in all cases, it always referred to 4 stories,
yeah.
But that 2 meter seems to have fluctuated through time.
Okay, and just to confirm, with respect to parking requirements, there is nothing that, based on that 1991 bylaw, there is nothing specific that the city has to consider in that regard?
Through you, Chair Burke, I think what I would say is that the site-specific, if the applicant was to build a building today and did not require any relief from the bylaw, they could say this site does not require any parking. They have now come before council with the zoning bylaw amendment request, so I think it's in our purview, and certainly staff's purview, to look at an appropriate amount of parking for this site.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chair Burke, and thank you, Trevor. I'm sure you've got some work ahead of you, and the amount of comparative work will depend on the work ahead of Joel and how all of that that dovetails. And I will find that interesting when we get towards a formal public meeting, recognizing what the direction in draft 2. In terms of some matters of interest, and I'll get to the applicant on these as well, the density transfer that's being requested. I mean, by my math, that's a roughly nearly 100% increase on the Regina site, borrowing out of the King Street site. How is it that that staff will be reviewing and thinking about that kind of matter for when it's
through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Henry, I think one of the components of our staff report will be a fairly thorough review of the level of transfer, the appropriateness of transfer, and how it relates to the number of people living in the building, the number of cars leaving, coming into and from the site, and the amount of relief required to support a building with that much density.
And on that, the mayor asked a similar kind of question in terms of where the 14 was coming from. I have something similar in terms of the past history of zoning on the King Street frontage. If I read your overview here and the bylaw, sort of potential to max out at sort of four stories of non-res if you build out to the entire site, and a 250 unit per hectare designation, and yet there was only 14 meters provided for on the site. So I'm wondering, similar to the mayor, about how that sort of came to be, and how whether there's a view that all of that was expected to be able to be delivered on the King Street site.
Again, through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Henry, I believe the C8 zone was purposely designed to be flexible, such that you could build an all non-residential building and only use the FAR, floor area ratio, components of the bylaw to guide the development of your building. Or you could build a mixed-use building, in which case you'd have to rely on both. So it was certainly one of the earlier forward-thinking mixed-use zones. And could someone maximize both those? Unlikely, of course, but in the event that someone did build a mixed-use building, it needed guidance on both density frameworks to allow someone to do that.
I think the last thing I'll ask at this point is in terms of the road widening requests, because there's relief that I see for some of those. And reading the application, but is widening the road for the purpose of vehicular traffic the only reason that we would be interested in a road widening, or is there public realm benefits that we may still be interested in terms of those OP widenings?
Through you, Chair Burke, I feel as though, Councillor Henry, you've answered the question for me. I think there are a number of other aspects to a road allowance beyond just vehicular travel, particularly in the uptown, and particularly with a ion transit stop so close. Pedestrian movement, cycling movement, the ability to physically separate buildings from the pedestrian realm. Those are all important characteristics of a road in this location.
Councillor Leith.
Thank you, Chair Burke. I just want to get an idea, just how far that building goes. So on my Google map here, it goes to the Works Burger, right? The burger place. I was just wondering what the 80 King Street South.
Yeah, it also includes 88 King Street South if you're looking at a Google map.
So to the subway store.
It definitely includes the subway.
Okay.
I'm not sure if the subway is the last tenant.
Okay.
They're confirming for me that the subway is the last tenant.
Okay, so it'd be interesting to see like a visual of what that'll look like beside the rest of the block down the road. But anyway, just wanted that clarification. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for staff at this time? Seeing none, we'll ask our delegations to come forward. That would be Dan Curry from MHBC. Come on in, Dan.
Thank you, Chair Burke, members of council. My name is Dan Curry, MHBC Planning. I'm here on behalf of the owners of the building, or of the property, Torgan. They're also with me, George, Ellie, Vince, and also on behalf of the rest of the project team, Quadrangle Architects, MT Engineering, who's doing the servicing work, and Paradigm Transportation. And a number of my slides, I'll seek to address, either build on what Trevor said, or in some cases, I think can provide some explanation on some of the questions that you've raised. And of course, at the end, always willing to entertain whatever further questions you have. And as Trevor noted, the site consists of two properties, 80 King, 87 Regina. And yes, the extent of 80 King, the building itself, really goes to the edge of where the subway shop is and the burger restaurant directly to the south. The Torgan has a long history with this site. They've owned the property since 1989. The current building, 80 King, was built in the early 90s, about the same time as the city's parking structure, about the same time as the regional building. And even I think this building was about 1985. So all of this area developed at roughly the same time, or at least those 4 buildings. As Trevor mentioned, the proposal really is as 2 component parts. The expansion to the existing 2-story building, and it's interesting, the building was designed to accommodate greater height and structure. So it really doesn't require a great deal of engineering work to add on the additional 2 stories. As staff noted, it requires a zoning bylaw amendment simply to go to the 16 stories as opposed to the 14. And the reason there is at commercial floor story heights, 16 meters rather, is the height necessary in order to gain the type of floor to ceiling heights that current office users demand. That's written in feet, 1,000 square meters. It's approximately 3,000 square meters of office space there right now. So Trevor explained many of the details of the development or the component part on the 87 Regina Street. It is proposed to be a 25-story building. It will meet the height maximums in the official plan of 81 meters, which, as Trevor noted, require a zoning bylaw amendment. That, this whole area is planned to be mixed-use pedestrian-oriented. So all of the access to the building, the commercial space would be accessed off the Regina and Willis Way streetscape. 5 levels of structured parking. The reason it is above ground is simply due to the geology of the area. Right, it's in the floodplain, but more specifically, it's right beside the floodway, and Laurel Creek flows underneath the parkade, outlets, of course, just to the back of this building. So structurally and technically, you can't really put underground parking in that location. So that's the primary reason that it's above ground. And I'll speak to the pedestrian connections, the safe access. Trevor has already covered the elevations. The point of including these was to describe how those pedestrian bridges work. He confirmed how the safe access route would work through the new building through to the regional building. The pedestrian access over Hughes Lane is really to facilitate the office development. So as part of the 190 spaces are required amount that are needed for the residential component will be provided. There's more parking spaces provided than what is needed under the zoning bylaw, and some of those spaces would be available also for visitor parking as well as office tenants. So that's the purpose of the bridge across Hughes Lane. So previous to making a full application, Torgan has met with the city, but more importantly, the region of Waterloo in terms of the safe access route. And they've come to a legal agreement with the region that would facilitate. Then there's a route identified through the building, through the emergency stair exit. A new exit would be constructed at the that would be the most westerly and southwesterly corner of the regional building, with a new stair and walkway exiting out to the road, and safe access. The area, the limit of the regional flood line is right at the Marbles patio. And so taking that exit through and across the street to the Marbles patio provides that necessary safe access. So that agreement has been reached with the region. It would only be used in terms of emergencies when evacuation of the building needs to take place due to floods. Otherwise, the doors would remain locked and there would not be any access for either residents or occupants on either side. Trevor explained the setbacks, the zoning bylaw amendment components, the requests. I won't go into a lot of detail, but I will come back to the setbacks for all yards because there is a point I think I can further explain. Yes, this is Uptown. It's identified as the primary node. It's identified as the urban growth center, both in provincial policy, regional policy, city policy. So this is the area that your official plan says where you want some of the highest density, in part to facilitate the type of mixed-use development, residential, commercial, entertainment. It's also the location of rapid transit. This type of development helps to support rapid transit. So in terms of the road widenings, in the official plan, sets out all the various designated road allowances. Willis Way is designated as an 18-meter road allowance. And just to orient you to this particular picture, King Street on the south, Regina Street at the bottom, Regina Street at the top, and here's the proposed residential building and 80 King Street South. So the red line indicates what the official plan designates Willis Way in terms of the width of that road. Right now, Willis Way is about a 12-meter right-of-way. As noted, I mean, the existing buildings on both sides of the street are at a zero lot line. So, yeah, feasibly, the ability to obtain that road right-of-way is challenged, if not impossible, at least in the near, medium, and I would argue maybe even the long term, because of the location of the existing buildings. So, would this really assist? Would that be achievable, even if council took the widening on this side? There is a policy in the city's official plan that allows council to consider not taking a road widening in certain situations. So feasibility is one aspect, but also what is the intent of the 18-meter right-of-way? And in this situation, it's not there in terms of necessary widening for vehicle flow, but likely more along the lines of Councillor Henry's questions, which were to facilitate pedestrian access. So on the other side of King Street, Willis Way, I believe is built out to the 18-meter wide right-of-way, and that provides, as you know, fairly generous sidewalks. I'll speak to this in the setbacks, but even though we're requesting that council not take the dedicated road allowance because it's not feasible, there is the opportunity, and part of our plan is that there will be an enhanced pedestrian environment that will accomplish the intent of what the official plan sets out to do in terms of identifying this roadway to be 18 meters as opposed to 12. In terms of urban design considerations, you have urban design policies, you have urban design guidelines, and even though these designs they're not final, there would be a site plan process, and the architects are still working through some of the detailed design. They're consistent with the city's urban design policies. In particular, as I spoke about, activity at an active level at street level, enhancing the pedestrian environment. There's a podium which consists of the parking garage, a tower setback, and then of course the tower. Vertical articulation and other design elements that are identified in the urban design guidelines have been considered. There's the mouse. And then similarly on the 80 King building, height and massing that's very similar to the buildings that are directly adjacent or in the near neighborhood. and as well as some of those other elements of articulation, projection, and interest in building as opposed to large slabs. There were a number of supporting studies undertaken. Trevor had identified these. If there are particular questions on any of these elements, we'd be pleased to respond. I had prepared this slide. It's the same one Trevor had shown. I had anticipated there might be questions. It was in my reserve slides as opposed to the overall presentation. But what I wanted to identify for you is that this black dashed line is the property boundary. The gray outline is the footprint of the building at ground level. The distance between the footprint on the sidewalk and the property line is approximately 2.5 meters. So, and if you recall that slide on the widening, if widening was to be achieved, there would be a requirement by the city to convey 3 meters from the property line. So in effect, in terms of a wider pedestrian environment, those types of things, that can be achieved even though that road widening is not taken. The other point I want to mention is that in terms of the setbacks, so at the ground floor level, this building, in terms of its footprint, doesn't go out to the lot line. The request for 0 meter setbacks are to facilitate the bridges, but also to facilitate that the parking structure, the podium, will be slightly larger and extend out and come, although not to 0, closer to the street line than the building. The distance between the building and the regional building is 6.1 meters to facilitate the driveway. That's how cars will access the parking structure. So in all cases, both at the ground floor level and the podium level, the building will be more than 6 meters from the regional building. And then, of course, the tower on top is smaller than the parking structure. The outline, I don't think, is necessarily shown on this drawing. Just wanted to provide a little clarification for that. So a shadow study has been undertaken. If you have questions, we can go into details on that. I hadn't necessarily anticipated getting into the details of the shadow study. But as you know, there are some residential buildings and some residential units in the uptown, but this building is not directly adjacent to low-density well, really any residential at all. So with that, I'll conclude the presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dan. I know we have a couple of questions. Councillor Durrell.
Thank you, through you, Chair Burke. Thank you. My first question, I guess, might be for you or for the architect, but what's the inspiration behind this building? It is such an important piece in Uptown. Architecture's like art. Explain
Yes.
to me what the inspiration is here.
Okay. I will turn that over to the architects. As you know, I'm a planner.
You're a planner,
I'm
I
inspired
know.
by other things, but
You're not going to give it a go?
artistic
You're not
part
gonna
to
try?
this, I think I better let
Okay.
to Heather.
I wasn't counting on speaking tonight, so I'm just going to wing. So I think we'd taken a close look at some of the architecture downtown and surrounding, and we were actually inspired by a few buildings, and some of the things that we saw as well. So one of the pieces of architecture that we were inspired by was actually the Seagram building, and the kind of modern chord that it struck with us with respect to the renovation, especially with the shutters that are so sort of nicely and abstractly set open on the same angle. And we thought that was an inspiration of something that was a kind of graphic response, and also had something modern about it. So we looked at a very simple idea of angling the inset balconies on the residential facades on the two broad sides of the tower, and then a kind of strong and bold and simple response to a residential architectural component, which usually has, you know, many mullions and doors that, if to the surface of the building, really add, in our opinion, an architecture that had a more civic quality and would fit in downtown nicely. Similarly, for the building on King Street, we took a strong and simple approach to adding on to the building that's there, a kind of Miesian approach with respect to having an expression of outboard structure and a very simple pattern of windows, which we feel results in a very handsome and quiet addition to the building that's already there.
That's great. Thank you. We take our architecture very seriously in Uptown, so I think that's fantastic.
Well, we do too. So,
yes,
yeah.
Amazing.
Okay.
I think of sails when I see it too.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you.
Okay,
I
all right.
appreciate you getting up with no notice at all and a horrible drive on the Innovation Corridor. My other question is, I know that talking about trees and informal is like a little premature, but I just wanted to touch on it a little bit in the sense that you are on the LRT track on the one side, which right now there's parking on there, but anyway, so I'm wondering, there won't be trees obviously there. So is there a tree plan on the Willis Way and Regina side?
So through you, Chair Burke, the King Street building is built out to the property line on both sides. So there's little opportunity on the private property to really do much at all. On the Regina side, as I noted, there is some opportunity at ground level. So this will go through a site plan approval process. As part of that site plan, there will be a requirement for a landscape plan. So it's a little early, yes, to say maybe how that might play out or to give you any details as to how that might play out. But there will have to be a landscape plan, and the city will hold us in that regard to ensure that there is a good pedestrian environment. Some of that will depend on the ability to actually plant material in a very urban situation, given the amount of land that's there. But certainly there will be a requirement to have a landscape plan.
Councillor Burke, would it be okay if I asked a few more questions in a row?
Have at it.
Thank you. So I see that there's 3,000 square feet on the commercial level, and I'm wondering what the possibility is of breaking that up into several smaller places to allow for smaller businesses to be able to afford that space?
Yeah, that's right. Through you, Chair Burke, to answer your question directly, yes. The owners are considering or expecting actually that the rental of that overall commercial space on the ground floor is likely to be many tenants as opposed to just one large tenant. So that's actually a very likely scenario.
I think that's all my questions. Thank you very much.
Councillor Rayleigh.
I think this is the first application I've ever seen that contemplates future climatic catastrophe. It's really interesting to consider, and unfortunately the chair doesn't allow us to comment, but if I was allowed to comment, I would say this is really that. With respect to my question, it has to do with the parking garage, and your beautiful picture gives us a sense that the parking garage itself has some kind of concealment with respect to seeing the cars. And it seems almost like a see-through effect. You can see a little. Can you go to that picture, Dan?
I can.
So my question is, the building will face City Hall. It's on a significant street and a significant area. Will we get a sense of there's some artistic treatment with respect to concealing the cars?
The short answer, through you, Chair Burke, is essentially yes. As described previously, I mean, there's a lot of thought, there's a lot of willingness on the part of the landowners that this be a signature building in the sense that it's got a high quality of design. We know that we have to have a parking we have to provide parking. The building won't function without parking, regardless of what that 1991 bylaw allows. They need to provide parking. And it can't be provided underground. So, having said that, then that podium becomes a very important piece. And it can't look like it's just a warehouse for cars. The city council are going to demand more than that, but so frankly, my clients as well. So there has been a lot of thought. I believe that some of what you're picking up on is a purposeful design intent. But I don't know, Heather, if you wanted to add anything further to the thought process and the artistic vision that goes into that.
I'm actually glad there's a question about the facade treatment of the parking. I think it is a little bit difficult to make out the specific detail in this rendering, and as Dan pointed out, we still have site plan approval to go through where we can provide additional details. But what you're seeing here in this image is in fact a metal screen that is made out of metal ribbons that are all equal in dimension, but that actually just bend and fold as they kind of cascade down the building. So we're hoping, again, it's our idea that as you move around the building from oblique angles, the facade will actually change and become more transparent or more opaque depending on your particular angle of view as it coincides with the changing angles of those metal ribbons.
Condo or rental?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Condo or rental?
Yeah. Undecided at this point.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you. Through the chair, a couple of items. I want to ask about the logic that you used in transitioning the units from one site to another. So, for example, I've seen it before where somebody might be giving part of their land to the city to have a trail, and if they had that piece of land, they could have built 6 units, but they're completely foregoing that and want to transfer the 6 units to their available land. But if I look at this, really, this piece of land, you're able to build 135 bedrooms. You're transferring another 123 to get to 258. So actually a 91% increase, yet on the foregone piece of land, you're still actually going to maximize its use as well in a commercial. So maybe you could just walk me through the logic of the fairness of that, how you see that.
Sure. So through you, Chair Burke, I think there's 2 components to that answer. One of those is a policy component, which is that the Uptown, as described both by staff and then me briefly through the presentation, is that the Uptown area, the primary node, the urban growth center, is planned to achieve use of uses, floor space, etc. And that's for a number of good reasons, of which, Council, you fully understand. I don't need to go into that. Both Trevor and I identified some of the key and obvious ones, such as support of transit, etc. So that's part of it, is that this is an area where if there is going to be, if Uptown is to be achieved, if a site is to be redeveloped, this of density and range of uses that you want bring. The other component to that is, or the other component to the answer is really one of feasibility as well. So the alternative is that the density isn't transferred. And so the residential permissions, the number of bedrooms that would be permitted on the King Street site is in fact left on the King Street site. The result is that there really isn't likely any office use. The office use is feasible and realistic on the King Street portion. On the upper floors of a 5-story parking structure, it's not very feasible or realistic. So it's only going to occur on that site. So notwithstanding, and it's a 90% transfer. Half the density comes from one site and is going to be transferred to the other. But I think in reality, the office probably does not occur if that doesn't happen. And you know, notwithstanding that there's a height cap on that street side, which is put in place for reasons of historic street wall, there probably wouldn't be a need to transfer the density. They might have built 2 towers with a residential component above. But those are really the thinking that underlies that request.
Okay, and that's what I was looking for, your perspective on that. Second, you made a comment, this place will have more parking than what is required when you were referring to the fact that some of the parking would be for the commercial operation. So I'm just trying to get your numbers, and they're not, I didn't take them down. Oh, there it is, 190 spaces.
Yep.
So 190 spaces, once you subtract out the commercial ones, the visitor ones for the residents, the ones required for maintenance vehicles, maybe accessible parking spaces. How many are left for the residents? Like, what is the ratio? You said it maintains the required ratio.
Yeah, so the parking regulations that have been applied here in terms of what's necessary to provide are the numbers that are the parking regulations that are in the city's proposed zoning bylaw. So I believe, and I'm going to asterisk that because otherwise I'll have to spend a couple minutes looking at the report to remind myself exactly what the parking ratios are. But I believe they're 1.25 spaces per unit, which includes parking for the residential unit as well as a component for visitor. But then because it's in the Uptown, there's a decrease or a parking credit of I think 0.6%, 60% decrease.
Okay.
So. The short answer is that the 190 spaces results in a greater number of parking spaces allocated to the residential component than what your proposed zoning bylaw would require. So there's more residential parking, and that includes bicycle parking and visitor parking as well.
Okay, thank you.
I have Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chair Burke, and thank you, Dan, for sort of pre-answering one of my questions. It's always a little bit helpful and to get some navigation through the site plan. Picking up on the mayor's line of questioning, I am curious about that the feasibility comment on 80 King, given it is neither required to have nor is proposed to have any parking associated with it, and that's normally the limiting factor. I would think in terms of feasibility on cost for building in a constrained environment. So I am curious about that, and I'll ask you to comment on that in a second. But the other question I had here as well, and maybe it's more for your architect. I heard with great exposition comments on the inspiration for the building, certainly for the 80 King site, for the parking garage, and for 2 of the 4 faces of the tower. But I didn't hear much about the other 2 faces of the tower. And given given its height and location, I can imagine you'd see it from all angles from everywhere in Waterloo. So that is a curious omission to me that we've heard so far about half of the faces of the tower. So I'm wondering if you could comment on both of those items, or maybe get your architect to help you out.
Through you, Chair Berg, just a point in terms of the design of those facades. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll turn that again over to Heather from Quadrangle that can speak to those sides. And I mean, to start, she will certainly fill in we haven't given you the best probably angles to fully realize you know how good that side is as well. But I'll let her speak to that.
Okay, yes, again, we will be providing further details on the two shorter sides of the tower, but they are going to be patterned concrete, so it'll be panelized, but we're looking at different patterns, probably something simple or something that, again, we take some heritage meaning from the site, and we're looking to impress that in the concrete. I'd also like to say that those two, again, shorter sides of the tower are deliberately simpler to provide relief from the other two very textured broad surfaces. On either end. And what appears to be a strip is actually an indent in the plan, so it results in a glazed section in that particular suite that provides 3 sides of glass into that particular unit. So just to let you know that it's a little more three-dimensional than it's appearing in the renderings at this time.
No, I appreciate that, and we'll look forward to more detail. I think there's certainly a lot about this proposal that aims to be landmark, and to really consider the wide range of things that you're asking for, it would have to be. So I appreciate the additional detail on that.
Noted.
Your first question,
and I think I was mostly following up on the mayor's question around sort of the office expansion, and your comment around its lack of feasibility absent that. And I'm curious, given the lack of parking required and the lack of parking being provided, how that math actually sort of sorts out, given that that's a significant urban expense to otherwise accommodate, and is usually the source of the requests and challenges that we hear from other applicants in other places in the core.
Okay.
And Councillor Freeman. I'm sorry. No, I'm not completely here this evening. I admit to that.
That's fine. Through you, Chair Burke. So I want to make sure one thing's understood there, or maybe I'll take one step back. Any parking. Notwithstanding, there are 54 parking spaces on the 87 Regina Street property currently. So there is going to be parking provided for the office tenants in the parking structure. It isn't that there's going to be zero amount of parking. And that's simply to make it feasible, even in the uptown, even given all urban and the policy of feasibility side to provide parking for office, commercial, etc. And so they recognize that, and there is going to be commercial parking provided in the parking structure.
Now we'll go to Councillor Freeman.
My question is probably for staff, actually, so I might be able to give Mr. Curry a break if others don't have questions for Mr. Curry.
Are there any more questions for Mr. Curry? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So my question, Mr. Hawkins, and you may not know the answer now, but I just was trying to think, do we actually have a place in the city where we have a walkway over a city-owned right-of-way? And I just was trying to understand how we do that. Do we sell that air right? Do we lease it as an easement? I don't know how that works. I can think of two in Kitchener where there's walkways over public right-of-ways, but I don't know of them here.
But it would, in terms of process, be very similar.
I like selling the air. Good idea.
Is there anyone else present tonight who wishes to speak to this application? If there are no more delegations, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to Council at a later date. We now move on to item 7B. This is an informal public meeting. Consider zoning bylaw amendment applications Ed 1708, official plan amendment number 172439672, Ontario Incorporated, 450 to 460 Weber Street North. There will be no decisions made tonight. Council and the public seeing this application for their first time. Council looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to the application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position, and a staff report will be considered by Council during a formal public meeting at a future time. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands and anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of the formal public meeting. Anyone who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located on the desk at the rear of the Council chambers. If there's more than one registry, please ensure you are signing the appropriate one. The planner will now provide a brief overview of this application. Trevor.
Thank you again, Chair Burke. Official Plan Amendment number 17 and Zone Change Z 1708 concerns parcel of land with two. The property currently is effectively agricultural use. It's located on the east side of Weber Street North, just past the intersection with King Street, opposite Blithwood Road and Milford Avenue. In behind this parcel is the office building with IMS, and there is a daycare next to that, and immediately to the south of that is the Wildcraft Restaurant to Orient Council. This is the intersection of King and Blue Springs Drive, with the access to the apartment buildings on Blue Springs, as well as the plaza with Chapters, National Sports, and the warehouse operated by Loblaws. And then further to the north and east is the car dealership operated by Ford, and then just off my image is the parking lot of Waterloo Inn. This property is designated business employment. It's part of our employment lands designation. Part of the property has a 27-meter maximum height permission. Effectively, that medium high, which would allow up to 40 meters. The lands are within a minor corridor. They're very close to the major node at King and Weber. Employment uses are permitted, as you would expect, within the business employment designation. It's geared more towards sort of an advanced tech office, as you can see, office, data center, that type of use, as opposed to the traditional industrial uses. Ancillary commercial uses are permitted in this designation. Restaurants, childcare, for example, provided they are on the main floor, and there are limitations on how much you can have based on how large your building is. The lands are zoned Industrial 6, and office uses are permitted today. And one of the buildings has site plan approval for a 6-story office building. The 6 in the Industrial 6 zone refers to 6 stories. The lands have a minor variance, which allows 27 meters today. So although the 6 would typically allow you 18 meters, this property has previous permissions that allow 27 meters. And within that industrial zone, there are some limited ancillary commercial uses. Number of performance criteria, particularly related to parking, have to be met before you can make use of those. The applicant is seeking a specific provision area, so an SPA, a policy that would apply only to this property, and they're effectively seeking to change one component of the business employment designation, and that is The designation today would allow you to create 15% ancillary commercial uses within your building, so within a building. And the applicant is asking that that 15%, because they plan to build more than one building, they would like some flexibility to move it between buildings. In other words, and the ability to only put them in two buildings, so one of those buildings might exceed 15%. So that is why they need the official plan amendment. The official plan also guides those ancillary uses to the street, so in this case to Weber Street, and because this property has quite a bit of depth, and one of the buildings in particular might be quite large, they would like the opportunity to orient some of those uses to internal connections within the site rather than have them all fronting directly onto Weber Street. In terms of the zoning bylaw amendment, the applicant is, in general terms, seeking to bring this property into conformity with our official plan. So they're almost, in a way, council could think of it as skipping ahead of our comprehensive zoning bylaw and asking for a number of the permitted uses that our official plan currently contemplates for this designation and that are. And then again, that 15%, they would mirror that request that they made for the official plan into the zoning bylaw, some flexibility in moving it between the buildings and exceeding 15% in one particular building, moving them around the site, not just fronting onto Weber Street, and then finally take advantage of the official plan height allowance for the bottom portion of the property south of Milford, where the official plan would allow 40 meters. They're hoping to gain 40 meters so they can construct a 12-story building. And here is the concept site plan that the applicant has provided. The red line shows the property divide between the property that would front onto King Street that contains the IMS and daycare center. The applicant also owns that parcel, although it isn't subject to this particular application. This particular building, which I will have an elevation for on the next slide, has been site plan approved. Although this site plan shows two entrances, the approval only contains one entrance to the building, and it is opposite Blithwood as per the region's direction. Second building, 6 stories, would have quite a large floor plate of commercial uses, and then this half of the building in this quadrant would be the 6 stories, and then finally the 12-story building at the end. So you can see that they would provide commercial uses in this building and this building, but not this building, and as a result, it's likely that that one building in the middle would have more than 15% of its floor area devoted to those ancillary uses. But overall, the site has approximately 12% of its floor area devoted to those ancillary commercial uses. This is a rendering of the building that has received site plan approval. It's a 6-story building, would have main floor commercial uses, and applicant has contemplated a daycare on the main floor of that particular building. I'm sure Mr. Patterson will elaborate further on those matters. In terms of the submitted studies and reports, a planning report was submitted. The noise study dealt specifically with that daycare use, given the noise generated by Weber Street in particular, and then any of the noise generated from the building itself and any future buildings in terms of the stationary HVAC equipment noise and how the daycare could operate in that facility without the noise impacting its operation. The concept site plan that council has seen, and then the building rendering of one of the buildings. There don't have defined building renderings of the other 2 buildings yet. In terms of staff's review, we'd be looking at the reports, those plans, the requested changes to the official plan and zoning bylaw. Again, we would do a comparison of how this project meets our draft comprehensive zoning bylaw, second or third draft, depending on timing, and then any public and agency comments, particularly the region of Waterloo, given Weber Street being a regional road, and any comments generated from the neighborhood opposite. Thank you, Chair Burke.
Thank you. Looking for questions for staff. Do any councillors? We do indeed. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chair Burke, and thank you for part 2 of the Trevor Hawkins show this evening. Before I get to the comparison with the comprehensive zoning bylaw, this site obviously has a history in terms of past attempts to have certain things happen on it and that started to generate at least one email today from residents that remember those past battles. So just to confirm, so I can say it back to them. In any way, do the requests equal the opportunity to re-loblaws the site?
Through you, Chair Burke, no, I think certainly that in response to that email, some points of clarification probably could have resolved a number of those concerns. The commercial uses are simply ancillary uses that would be designed to support the employment uses on the building, and they would be limited to the main floor only.
I just wanted to hear staff say that, so it wasn't just my eyes that could say that. I think that should help as this application gets considered. In terms of the exceeding 15%, except not exceeding 15% on one building, but not the whole site, how do we anticipate that would get managed? Does the first building that is coming through have less than 15% or equal to? Because I could imagine a scenario, depending on how these are staged, where one building would exceed, but now it exceeds on the whole site because it hasn't been fully developed yet. I just want to understand how we would consider managing that to make sure that we never had a situation where people were exceeding the requirement.
Through you, Chair Burke, there are certainly a number of tools we could exercise within the purview of the SPA, the specific provision area, and provisions in the zoning bylaw to manage that. I will certainly consider those and craft.
As you write the next phase of reports, I see certainly that the applicant is aiming to effectively bring forward some of those items. I'd certainly be interested in seeing that comparison for which items that we're contemplating that are not being brought forward that we might find to be useful and necessary on sites like these. Certainly, cherry picking. I'm not suggesting cherry picking.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions from? No. All right. We do. Councillor Freeman.
Just when it comes back, perhaps there could be some clarity that to remind people this is employment land and that it's not commercial. Because, I mean, the comparison with the previous application, there is none, because it was going to be a 185,000 square foot superstore and primarily parking lot. So I think that it will be helpful. I think that people are just caught up in language. Like, so it makes sense to me what you're saying here. So they're just saying that they want to be able to spread that 15% around so that maybe the daycare is a little bigger in one building and the whatever coffee shop's a little bit smaller in another building. That's really what we're talking about here.
Yes, through you. But sometimes when it's this particularly technical, we have to resort to the language that sometimes is harder to understand.
All right. Thank you, Trevor. We have one registered delegation. It's Scott Patterson.
Good evening, Chair Burke, members of committee, council, and public and staff. Again, my name is Scott Patterson from the Rush Patterson & Associates, planning consultant for the landowner. Trevor provided a detailed description of where the property is located, and as noted, my client also owns the property fronting onto King Street at 435 King Street North, the IMS building and Pluto daycare facility. So as noted, the official plan designates these properties as employment. The southern portion of the property. So our request, as Trevor had noted, is for the modification of the 15% limit. That's specifically in your official plan. It's a wording that says that each individual building cannot exceed 15%. So this is a technicality. I'm not sure the official plan contemplated developments such as we're proposing, but this is specifically meant to address that, and I'll get into that a little further. And also to address, you'll see offices. And the intent naturally is for this development on Weber Street to be primarily office. The concept site plan proposes about 700,000 square feet of office, and the ancillary uses that we're proposing are about 90,000 square feet if they were fully built out in the later phases. To answer an earlier question, in the first building, it's well below 15%. It's below 15%, not well below, but it's below that number. It's when we get into the next phases of development that we exceed that amount, and I'll show you how that works. What we're requesting for permitted uses is what's outlined in the official plan. When the new comprehensive zoning bylaw comes into place, there's a good chance that even more a range of permitted uses would be allowed on the property. What we're trying to do is simply ask what the official plan contemplates for these lands and not exceed that at this time. A 6-story building in this location, a 6-story building here with a larger podium, and then the 12-story building in this location, all primarily for office use. As noted, we do have site plan approval, basically just waiting the execution of the site plan agreement for the first phase. This is a 6-story building, and as contemplated, there is some ancillary use in the ground floor, and we're also looking at a daycare facility as well. And then this would be a podium feature, which would primarily be commercial, and then the 12-story office building here. The reason for the increase in the 15% is primarily due to this location. If these buildings were joined together, we probably wouldn't need that requirement. But because they're separated, and because this is a taller building and this is by itself, we do exceed the 15% requirement specifically for that building. And because of the shape of this building, we don't contemplate that all of the commercial or ancillary uses will be able to face Weber Street. There's a good chance there may be a central corridor or something created in this building where the ancillary uses may actually face internal to a central created. And why we're asking for that. And as you'll see on the King Street side, there's also a proposal for redevelopment for that as well. There's currently no application before the city for that. But I just wanted to bring that to your attention that this is a master plan project. We're anticipating some significant residential development on the King Street side, which would require a zoning bylaw amendment. It's contemplated by your official plan. So I may be before you sometime in the near future, hopefully seeking approvals for hopefully 2 25-story buildings and a significant number of residential units on that portion of the property. We're also looking at commercial uses and office uses on that portion as well. So it's a very comprehensive development, large scale. As noted, it's 700,000 square feet of office just on the Weber Street side, and a large extent of commercial in total. So what we're asking for is just the ancillary uses that the official plan currently allows and the modifications in the percentages and how we can do that. We're jumping ahead of your comprehensive zoning bylaw review, to be perfectly honest, because there may be an appeal, which may slow that process down. It allows us to work with tenants. It allows us to ensure that the office tenants coming onto our site, that we can say we're going to go for some ancillary uses to complement those and to make sure that we have a complete development on site, and hopefully that helps us attract the office tenants that we need. And if you have any questions or concerns, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Scott. I know we have some. Mayor Jaworski.
Only out of interest, through the chair, only out of interest, how old is the site plan for the building that's approved? How old is that? Is that like the past year, or is that a lot of years?
No, that, through you, Chair Burke, that application is very current.
Okay.
We just started that process in 2016, and the site plan agreement was just released to us about a month ago, so it's very current.
Okay, thank you. And with respect to employment, so these being employment lands and the square footage, how many people do you envisage this development employing?
Through you, Chair Burke, I honestly don't know that answer. Just based on the square footage, I'm sure we could do a calculation on how many people could occupy the buildings.
What is the total square footage? Do you know?
700,000 just in office on Weaver Street.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, Scott. We'll review the issue and provide further reporting to council at a later date. And we move on to 7C. This, oddly enough, is an informal public meeting to consider zoning bylaw amendment application Z1709, Maison Canada Holdings Limited, 185 King Street North. No decisions will be made tonight. Council and the public seeing this application for the first time. Council is looking for feedback from interested parties with respect to this application. Tonight's comments will be taken into consideration in developing a staff position, and a staff report will be considered by Council during a formal public meeting at a later date. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands and anyone who signs the registry will receive notice of the formal public meeting. Anyone who wants further notice of this application, including the formal public meeting and passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate registry located on the desk at the rear of the Council chambers. If there is more than one registry, please make sure you are signing the appropriate one. The planner will now provide a brief overview of the application. Rita.
Thank you, Chair Burke, Mayor Jaworski, members of Council, ladies and gentlemen. This is an informal public meeting for 185 King Street North, Zoning Bylaw Amendment Z1709. The subject site is located on the southwest corner of King Street North and Bricker Avenue, just across the street from Wilfrid Laurier University, and it is located approximately 880 meters from the nearest LRT station at Seagram Drive. This is a close-up of the subject site and surrounding properties. To the north of the site is Wilfrid Laurier University. To the west and south are multi-residential apartment buildings. And to the east are multi-residential apartment buildings and single detached residential dwellings. This is a picture of the subject site. An existing 11-story apartment building is located on the site. The building contains 37 units with 5 bedrooms in each unit and 37 parking spaces. The site plan for the building was approved in April 2012, and the building permit was issued in August 2012. These are pictures of the properties surrounding the subject site. Again, to the north is Wilfrid Laurier University, and there's a picture of it. To the east are multi-residential apartment buildings and some single detached houses. And finally, to the south are multi-residential buildings. In terms of the official plan, the subject site is designated mixed-use high-density residential, which permits apartment buildings and ancillary commercial uses, including restaurants. With respect to zoning bylaw 1108, the subject site is zoned multiple residence 25, which permits residential apartment buildings, but does not permit any mixed-use buildings. This is the approved site plan for the existing building. Through the zoning bylaw amendment, the applicant is proposing to convert 233 square meters of ground floor amenity area within the existing building to restaurant and lounge space, shown for you in red on this slide. According to the applicant, the intent is to have the restaurant and lounge space function as an amenity area for residents as well as a restaurant. Through their application, the applicant has requested to rezone the lands from MR25 to MR25 with site-specific provisions, to add a restaurant use as an ancillary use, to reduce the minimum parking requirement on the site to allow the requested restaurant use. The applicant is requesting that the existing 37 parking spaces located on the site be used for both the residential portion of the building as well as the restaurant. To do so, the applicant is proposing 3 spaces per 100 square meters, or 7 parking spaces for the restaurant component, leaving 30 spaces or 0.81 spaces per unit for the residential portion of the building. This is the list of reports and plans submitted in support of the application. All of this information is currently being reviewed by city staff and regional staff. And the information is also available on the city's website on our zone change applications webpage.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Whaley.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Silak. I'm curious to know what the current amenity spaces are. We approved this building to give amenity spaces for the residents, and what are they now that might be lost if a restaurant is approved?
The only amenity spaces that are available in this site is the 233 square meters of ground floor amenity space that they are proposing to convert.
So what's on the space now?
I'm not sure how this space is being used at the moment. I'm assuming it's vacant. It was not identified in the information that the applicant submitted.
I'm hopeful that during the formal public hearing, that we have an understanding about what amenity space exists for the current residents, what would be lost, and how they would be replaced.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm along the same line of thinking and questioning of Councillor Whaley, but the way I've heard it, and maybe I'm wrong, but we really want to take the amenity space, or they're requesting to take the amenity space, convert it to commercial space, yet count it as amenity space. And I'm trying to think, if that is sort of what is being requested there, how would we balance that with all the other developments we have around the city?
That is certainly a question that staff has to the applicant as well, and it's something that we're going to continue to work with the applicant to determine how that would function, a space that is a restaurant as well as amenity space. It's something that I haven't seen before.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Thank you, Rita. We have one delegation, and that is Stephen Jefferson.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. Members of Council, my name is Steve Jefferson with K Smart Associates Limited of Kitchener. I have prepared this presentation units within that, and the space that has been designated since day one for an amenity use is 233 square meters. Instead of going ahead and constructing that right away, the owner took time to work with the tenants of the building and seek their input and find what they would like to see for the use of that space. It is currently vacant. He did prepare essentially a survey of the residents, and their indication is that they wanted to see a place where they can meet friends, lounge, study, grab a coffee, a quick bite. Breakfast was one thing that they noted. They wanted to be able to hit the ground running and have a spot where they could buy breakfast rather than doing it in their own unit necessarily. And so, again, the primary purpose is to serve as the amenity space in this building. A secondary component would be the lunch counter, where food can be served, such as the breakfast, lunches, and snacks. The food service is to be operated and controlled by Maison Canada, the building owner. So this includes hours of operation, access. And as a building common area, there would be no obligation to purchase food. It would be like having a recreation room in your home and having a vending machine in the corner where it's able to have food provided to you. The plan currently permit a wide range of uses, including a restaurant. If the owner wanted to wait for your zoning update process to go through, at the current time it is proposed that the future zoning would include residential use on this site. They decided not to wait for that they wanted to move forward with this site-specific zoning to be able to build out this space and make it available for the tenants. In our report, we have included this conceptual site plan that shows a range of types of seating, round tables, a lunch counter, restaurant-style booths, and lounge couches. As the building was originally intended, it would be full portion of the building without having to use stairs. That is in the corner right down here. So the elevator banks are over here for the main residence. But this is a lift, so someone coming in the front entrance could go up the few feet and be able to get the same level as this amenity space. So this is what the room currently looks like. It does have the windows in place. You have view of both King Street and Bricker. They've just been waiting to to decide what the best way is to build this out. And the original site plans did show this as a recreation area. Many buildings do have a gym room where people can go and work out and get their physical fitness. Based on the feedback from the tenants, the owner has decided that this approach of creating a common shared space for the tenants was preferable rather than making another gymnasium. This provides a view of the front doors facing the intersection with Laurier in the background, and the bottom right-hand picture is the approximate zoning bylaw. We looked at the different wording that would permit the sale of food. And because of the size of the space, it was decided that we would use the terminology restaurant. With the potential for resident guests to also use the space, the parking spaces were assessed. And as we looked at the standard as an accessory use, the minimum number of visitor parking spaces required would be 7. The remaining 30 spaces would provide parking at a rate of 0.8 spaces per unit instead of the 1.0 space per unit. As noted, the site is adjacent to Wilfrid Laurier. There's a high percentage of walking and cycling already. Allocate those for this amenity space use. And here are just 2 pictures showing the surface parking accessible from Bricker Avenue. There are 12 spaces plus 1 accessible parking space in this portion of the site. So it would be 7 of these spaces that would be converted from private parking for tenants only to now being available as visitor parking. There is video security, and they would be able to be clearly labeled as visitor parking for the site. This summarizes my presentation. I'm willing to take any questions you may have.
Looking for questions from council. Councillor Whaley.
Well, that's quite an interesting story that you tell. I want to drill down a little bit on it. How long has this building been open for rental?
Just over 2 years.
So in that last 2 years, the amenity space that we approved has for residents has not been used for any purpose at all.
It has been an open space. If the students wanted, if the residents wanted to meet in it, it was open to.
Well, your picture tells quite tells it all. With respect to the restaurant, you tell us that you queried your tenants and that they want this restaurant, that they think that's the use for their own purposes. Tell me, will there be any availability of use of the restaurant for the general public?
That is the intent, yes.
So it's and will it have signs out the front?
That is still to be determined on what level of advertising there would be. Again, the general intent is that it be the amenity space for the tenants with food to be available. It is not intended to be leased to a third-party operator, so it would be.
But you're going to have you're going to put signs up to welcome the public to come there for a restaurant. So is it going to have restaurant hours, or is this amenity space a 24-hour space for the tenants?
We have had those discussions with staff on what the hours would be, and we are going to follow up with those details. It has not been confirmed exact hours, but at this time, it would not be a 24-hour space. It would be controlled by the building owner.
We approved the building, and you've had tenants in there for 2 years, and you've provided no amenities in the amenity space, and now you're asking to transfer it to a retail restaurant operation with limited hours.
That is not how the owner has presented it and how I've tried to describe it. It is not a commercial restaurant for the general public. It is developing the amenity space for the use of the residents of the building with the option to be able to purchase food.
So I'll have a question to staff after.
Mayor Jaworski.
Just following that line of thinking from Councillor Whaley, if the intention of the food venue is for amenities for the existing residents, then why is there parking that's parking for people coming there? Is that to go to the restaurant?
It would be a combination of if some of the tenants invite some of their classmates who happen to go there by car, it would create the option for them to have parking on site. Currently, there are no visitor parking spaces allocated. It is all for tenant parking only. So this would actually create the additional option for visitor parking on site, either for people just coming to visit the
And because I know you say you're not going to rent this to or lease this to a third-party restaurant operator. How long has Maison Canada been in the restaurant business?
At this site, they have not.
At any site?
I do not know if they operate food services at any other facilities, but they are aware that to proceed through that part of the approvals process, that it would have to meet all of the standard requirements.
So if
my guess is that if there is little demand for the food service portion of it, then the space would just remain as a common meeting area for the tenants of the building to be able to socialize and meet with their fellow residents of the building.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. We do have some questions of staff, so we'll go around the table on that. Councillor Whaley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Ms. Zillock, when we approved this building many years ago now, it was our understanding that a portion of the building would be turned over for amenity space. This was a breath of fresh air for us because many of the buildings before that were buildings that were really student warehouses. In fact, big buildings, 5 to the benefit of the residents at all. So do we have a policy around following up on the promise of the developer who makes all these promises to get their building built, that they're going to provide amenity spaces? Do we have any way to hold them to that promise?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Councillor Whaley. All we have is an approved site plan that shows a recreation.
That through Chair Burke to Councillor Whaley. Zoning, under the Planning Act, we cannot attach conditions to it, so we couldn't build it into the bylaw. And site plan, specifically under the Planning Act, states that you cannot really look into or deal with the internal part of the building. So it's difficult for us to enforce things with the tools that we have. I would say that the intent of what was approved has not been carried out, but from a legal perspective, there's very little tools that we have currently available to us.
One of the tools we do have, this is a question, would be to reject this restaurant application in the hope that sometime in the future.
I think we have to stop you. That would cross the line into an opinion. Any other questions to staff? Mayor Jaworski.
On the visitor parking, so this proposal contemplates creating 7 new visitor parking spots, whereas they mentioned that 0 are provided today. It seems interesting that we would have approved something years ago with 0 visitor parking. Is that true?
Through you, Chair Burke, to Mayor Jaworski, the multiple
7 visitor parking spots where.
No, that's not correct. There's only 37 parking spaces. They would take 7 of those 37, right, allocated to the commercial component, to the restaurant, leaving 30 parking spaces for the existing residential units.
Okay, yeah, so 7 non-residential are.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Freeman.
I just don't know quite how that interacts, because I just didn't know if by approving this as an amenity space with this restaurant that we're automatically fettering the business license bylaw process. So I just didn't understand how that goes together. And I also wondered about, I guess prior to construction, I don't even know how this works. They have to get all their health code and everything like that. They have to pass all of that stuff with the region. And I don't know. Typically when you see a restaurant come through, there's a lot of components associated with the kitchen and thought I'd put that out there.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. So if they wanted to move forward with the restaurant, first they would have to have the zoning in place, and then they would be able to apply for a business license. You would not be able to get a business license before having the zoning in place. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I have one question, and it's about, I guess, what defines an amenity, because I know there are buildings in the city where there's a nice kitchen, there's an oven, there's a microwave, there's a place to gather, and nobody charges you for making food. Is it common for an amenity in a building like that to be a profit-making enterprise?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last portion of your question? Is it common?
Is it common to have what had been designated as an amenity space turned into what I'm assuming is a profit-making enterprise inside a building?
We have seen other buildings convert portion of their amenity space to commercial uses. I can't recall one where all of the amenity spaces have been converted, but I'm sure that has happened before.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Jaworski.
So if somebody was coming up with a proposal that had a coin-operated laundry area, is that considered amenity space or not amenity space?
Okay.
If I can just clarify some of the previous applications that we've had, it was clear that it was removal of one type of use, amenity, to convert to commercial. And it was clear on all the other applications that council had received. This proposal is being presented in a different way. But the other proposals, it was clearly to commercial space. And so council's raised a number of concerns and questions, which we've taken note of, and staff have similar concerns and would be working through to try and resolve those concerns.
Thank you. Seeing none, if there are no more delegations, this informal public meeting is now concluded. Staff will review the issues and provide further reporting to council at a later date. We'll move on to consideration of notice of motion. We have none. Notice of motion, none. Communications and correspondence, none. Regional information and correspondence, none. Unfinished business, none. Oh, you have some. Okay. Mayor Dave.
This Wednesday is World Blood Donor Day, I believe. Either way, we're running a blood clinic on
of 1867. Well, it's a segue habit. Council met 2 times in June. The focus was on Mount Hope Cemetery. A motion from John B. Snyder that a board fence be erected around the cemetery. It was carried, by the way. George Edler then moved that the clerk be authorized to advertise for tenders for constructing the fence around the Mount Hope Cemetery, also for cleaning the same and recovering all logs and rubbish therefrom. A word that is never used often enough anymore, therefore. Be accepted, and that the clerk do notify Mr. Shantz. That was carried. It is kind of interesting that you hear all these names, and if you walk through Mount Hope Cemetery, you can see Hoffmans and Seagrams and Springers and McCormicks, and names that are attached on buildings and streets and edifices around here. And I think we sometimes tend to forget that the people who walked before us are now kind of lying around for us to go read those cemeteries and the histories. And I've always found it very fascinating to go through cemeteries and try to connect it to the rest of the place. And there was a time where Waterloo and Berlin discussed a joint cemetery, but in the end, Waterloo went its own way, purchasing 7 acres of land from John Hoffman, who added an extra acre for a free cemetery. The cemetery is immediately west of the Kitchener Cemetery, separated by the boundary line of the two cities. If you haven't never done it, go and do a cemetery walk. And you don't have to do it in the middle of October. Jane's Walk does it too, yeah. So get out there and do it and find out the mysterious people that have lived at some point in your city. Are there any questions? For me, I imagine they are legion, but I can't help that. I'd be happy to do Jane's Walk. Do I have a motion for adjournment? Councillor Veith, Councillor Freeman, everybody? In and done.